One of the things I want to talk about real quick is compensation patterns. Now, a lot of people know what a compensation pattern is. Obviously, the body is trying to take the path of least resistance to conserve energy for survival. But a lot of people don't know why they happen. And if you understand one simple principle, you'll be able to address through your training all the compensation patterns that your body might be trying to do so that you can maximize your return on investment of time and effort. So by the end of this, you'll know why that happens and what you need to do. Now, the first thing is that when you want to build a muscle, you want to subject it to high levels of tension throughout its entire range. But because of the way the muscles are designed, in that their capacity to produce force is greatest when they're near their mid-range and it's lowest at their lengthened and shortened positions, it's easy to understand why the body compensates. Now, I'll give you a quick example with a lying leg curl. When you perform a lying leg curl, what you want to do, or what you are doing, is you're trying to shorten your hamstring. Now, because the hamstring is responsible for extension of the hip and flexion of the knee, a fully shortened hamstring would consist of an extended hip and a fully flexed knee. So on a lying hamstring curl, you're already in an extended hip position. Your hip is pretty extended. I mean, some of the machines might have a slight bend to allow for flexion in the hip, but for the most part, it's an extended hip position. Now, as you bend your knee, you're trying to shorten your hamstring at the knee joint, and in a fully contracted position, the hamstring is shortened at the knee joint and the hip joint. This is the fully shortest position that the hamstring is capable of going through. Therefore, it is the weakest position, or one of the weakest. Obviously, the fully lengthened would be just as weak, based on the principle I just discussed. Now, because it's as weak of a position as it is, what will happen when people perform the movement is their ass will ride up off the bench, and then you'll hear some trainer give them some bullshit fucking cue because he doesn't know what the fuck's going on in the first place, like keep your ass on the pad or keep your body tight to the bench. Well, obviously the individual is probably trying to do that. They're not compensating for the sake of compensating. They're compensating for a reason, and the reason is because as they try to enter the shortest range the muscle's capable of going into, they lose their strength. So to compensate, to take the path of least resistance, the body flexes at the hip. Now, what's happening as it flexes at the hip? As it's lengthening the hamstring at the hip joint. So as it shortens at the knee joint, it's being lengthened at the hip joint to avoid going in to its shortest range, which is one of its weakest positions. So that's why that compensation happens in the first place. And what it means is that the weight that you're using is too heavy for the capacity of the muscle to produce force in its shortest range. So if you want to train it through its entirety and maximize your return on investment of time and effort, you're going to have to use a lighter weight that allows you to get into that range. So this isn't to suggest not performing curls with your ass coming off the bench. It's just to say that if that's all you did exclusively, you're leaving results behind on the table that you could be getting. So you might want to include sets where you use a lighter weight and you just target that shortest range. Another good example is that of a dumbbell row. You see a lot of guys do their dumbbell rows. You know, some big guys are using 150, 200-pound dumbbells, and their elbows will flare out to the side, and they'll say this shit like, oh, I can't keep my elbows tight to my body because my back is too fucking big. And Ben Pekulski touched on this in a video that he put out recently, in that, well, Kai Green keeps his elbows to his hip, and his back's not too big, and he's got the biggest back in the fucking planet. So if he can do it, how come you can't do it? And the reason they can't do it is that because if you're trying to train the lat, target the lat, you want to bring that insertion point of the lat as close to where it originates. And to do that, mechanically, you're going to have to keep your elbow tight to your body and pull towards your hip. This is the most mechanically proper position to perform a dumbbell row for the lat. If the elbow flares out to the side, that's indicative of a few things. Number one, it's compensating because it's too weak, or the lat is too weak in its shortest range. And number two, it's dumping some of that stress onto other muscles like the rear delt, the traps, the rhomboids, and other muscles of the back. Even the biceps a little bit are contributing more to producing the force to do that movement. So if you want fully developed lats, and a dumbbell row is your choice of exercise to do that, you're going to want to focus on keeping your elbow tight to your body. And if you can't do it, it's not because your back is too big, it's because the weight is too fucking heavy for the amount of force that your lat can produce in its weakest range. So you might benefit, if your goal is to develop your lat throughout its entirety, by using a lighter load that allows you to perform a more thorough range of motion. So that's why compensation patterns happen, because we are weakest in our shortest ranges of motion, in a muscle's shortest range, or its longest range as well, but generally you see the compensation when a muscle's in its shortest range. And this carries over to every exercise you see. When people are doing a bench press and their shoulders elevate, what's happening is, as they try to bring the insertion point of their pec closer to where it originates, they elevate their shoulders, And by default, they can't get the insertion point as close to where it originates. Therefore, the muscle cannot enter its shortest, weakest range. It is held in a longer range than you might want it to be, and as a result can produce more force. You can lift more weight. So think about this when you're doing your movements. If you're compensating, why you're compensating is that you're too weak in that range, and you should probably use a lighter weight if you want to thoroughly develop your muscles throughout its entirety in that range. If you like this information, feel free to share it. Do for others as I've done for you. Pass the information forward. Failing to do so is a disservice to anybody that could benefit from this. So if you know someone that could benefit, share the fucking information, man. It's free. Click the fucking button at the bottom. Subscribe to the channel. I'll keep bringing it.